The cafeteria fell silent. Not the usual quiet when someone drops their tray, but the kind of silence that happens when something terrible is about to unfold. Marcus Thompson had been the king of Lincoln High for 3 years. At 17, he stood 6 feet tall with shoulders that could fill a doorway. His reputation was built on fear, and everyone knew better than to cross him. But today was different. Today, Marcus had pushed too far. The new security guard, Mr. Rodriguez, wasn't like the others. He didn't look away when Marcus shoved smaller kids into lockers. He didn't pretend not to hear when Marcus demanded lunch money from freshmen. And when Marcus decided to make an example out of quiet Jamie Chun in front of the entire cafeteria, Mr. Rodriguez stepped forward. What happened next would be talked about for years. In less than 3 seconds, everything Marcus thought he knew about power, respect, and consequences would change forever. The punch he threw would be the last one he'd throw for a very long time. This is the true story of how one moment of violence led to a journey of redemption, how a bully learned what real strength meant, and how sometimes losing everything is the only way to find yourself. Marcus Thompson's story didn't begin with that fateful punch. It started 3 years earlier when he first walked through the doors of Lincoln High School as a scared 14-year-old freshman. Back then, Marcus was nothing like the intimidating figure he would become. He was tall for his age, but skinny, with knobby knees and elbows that stuck out awkwardly from his too small clothes. His family had just moved to the city from a small farming town where everyone knew everyone. His father, Robert Thompson, worked double shifts at the steel mill to make ends meet. His mother, Sarah, cleaned office buildings at night and tried to keep the house running during the day. Money was always tight, and new clothes were a luxury they couldn't afford. On his first day at Lincoln High, Marcus wore his older brother's hand-me-down jeans that were 2 sizes too big and a faded t-shirt with a hole near the left shoulder. He carried his books in a torn backpack that his mother had tried to fix with duct tape. As he walked down the hallway, he could feel the stares and hear the whispers. The bullying started immediately. Derek Williams, a junior who seemed to tower over everyone, spotted Marcus during lunch. Derek had his own crew of followers who laughed at everything he said and did whatever he told them to do. They surrounded Marcus as he sat alone at a corner table, trying to eat the peanut butter sandwich his mother had packed for him. "Look what we have here," Derek said, his voice loud enough for half the cafeteria to hear. "Fresh meat. Where did you get those clothes, kid?" The trash bin behind Goodwill. The laughter that followed felt like knives cutting into Marcus's chest. His face burned red with embarrassment as Derek reached over and knocked his sandwich onto the floor. The peanut butter and jelly splattered across the dirty linoleum, and Marcus watched his lunch disappear under the sole of Derek's expensive sneaker. "Oops," Derek said with fake sympathy. "Looks like you're not eating today. Maybe next time your mommy can pack you something better." Marcus wanted to fight back. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to stand up, to push Derek away, to defend himself. But he was outnumbered and outmatched. Derek was bigger, stronger, and had friends. Marcus had nobody, so he sat there and took it, swallowing his pride along with his hunger. The harassment continued for weeks. Derek and his friends would trip Marcus in the hallways, throw spitballs at him during class, and steal his homework when teachers weren't looking. They called him names like Scarecrow and Trash Boy and made sure everyone else knew he was at the bottom of the social ladder. But the worst part wasn't the physical bullying or even the name-calling. It was the loneliness. Marcus would eat lunch alone every day, sitting in different corners of the cafeteria, hoping to become invisible. He would walk home alone while other kids hung out in groups, laughing and making plans he would never be part of. At night, he would lie in bed listening to his parents argue about bills in the next room, feeling like he was failing at everything. The turning point came 3 months into his freshman year. Marcus had grown several inches over the summer and had started working out in the garage with weights his father had bought at a yard sale. He was still skinny, but his shoulders were broader now, and his arms had some definition. More importantly, something inside him had changed. The constant humiliation had hardened him, turning his fear into anger and his sadness into rage. The opportunity for revenge came during gym class. They were playing basketball, and Derek, who wasn't much of an athlete despite his size, was struggling to keep up. When he missed an easy shot, Marcus found himself laughing along with some of the other kids. It felt good to see Derek fail at something for once. Derek noticed the laughter and didn't like it. After class, he cornered Marcus by the locker rooms. "You think I was funny, Scarecrow?" Derek shoved Marcus against the concrete wall. "You think you can laugh at me?" But this time, Marcus didn't back down. 3 months of rage boiled over as he shoved Derek back hard. Derek stumbled and fell backward onto the ground, his eyes wide with surprise. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, Marcus saw something he had never seen before in Derek's eyes: fear. "Don't ever touch me again," Marcus said, his voice low and steady. The words came out with a confidence he didn't know he possessed. Derek scrambled to his feet, his face red with embarrassment. He looked around to see if anyone had witnessed his humiliation, but the hallway was empty. Without another word, he turned and walked away. That night, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in months: power. He had stood up to Derek and won. He wasn't the scared little kid anymore. He was someone who could fight back. The next few months brought dramatic changes. Marcus continued to grow, reaching his full height of 6 feet by the end of freshman year. He spent hours in the garage, lifting weights, building muscle and strength. But more importantly, he discovered that other kids respected strength. When Derek tried to start trouble again, Marcus was ready. This time, he didn't just push back, he dominated. Word spread quickly through the school about Marcus's transformation. The skinny kid who used to get picked on was now someone to be feared. Freshmen and sophomores started avoiding him in the hallways. When he walked past, conversations would stop and people would look away. At first, Marcus told himself he was just protecting himself. He wasn't looking for trouble, but he wouldn't back down if it came to him. But gradually the line between self-defense and aggression began to blur. When a sophomore accidentally bumped into him in the hallway, Marcus shoved him hard enough to send him sprawling. When a freshman sat at what Marcus had decided was his table in the cafeteria, he made it clear the kid needed to find somewhere else to eat. By the time Derek graduated at the end of Marcus's freshman year, Marcus had taken his place as one of the most feared students in school. But unlike Derek, who relied mostly on his size and his crew, Marcus was truly dangerous. He had learned to fight, and more importantly, he had learned to intimidate without even throwing a punch. The summer between freshman and sophomore year was when Marcus really came into his own. His father got him a job at the steel mill, doing manual labor that built even more muscle onto his already impressive frame. The work was hard and dangerous, and it taught him to be tough in ways that went beyond physical strength. He learned to ignore pain, to push through exhaustion, and to never show weakness. When he returned to school for sophomore year, Marcus was unrecognizable from the scared kid who had walked through those doors just 12 months earlier. He was bigger, stronger, and radiating a confidence that bordered on arrogance. Teachers noticed a change too. Where once he had been quiet and invisible, now he was assertive in class, speaking up even when he didn't know the answer, challenging teachers when he disagreed with them. But it was his relationship with other students that really defined his new identity. Marcus discovered that fear was a powerful tool. When people were afraid of you, they gave you what you wanted. They moved out of your way in hallways. They let you cut in line at lunch. They did your homework if you asked them to. The first time Marcus really used his new power was with a kid named Danny Martinez. Danny was a freshman who reminded Marcus of himself in the year before. Small, scared, and obviously poor based on his clothes and beaten-up sneakers. Marcus saw Danny sitting alone at lunch, just like he used to do, and felt a strange mixture of sympathy and disgust. Instead of helping Danny or leaving him alone, Marcus found himself walking over to the kid's table. Something inside him, some dark part that had been growing all year, wanted to see what it felt like to be on the other side of the bullying equation. "Hey, kid," Marcus said, his voice carrying the same intimidating tone that Derek used to use. "You're in my seat." Danny looked up with the same terrified expression that Marcus remembered having whenever Derek approached him. I am sorry, Danny stammered. I didn't know. I'll move. But Marcus wasn't satisfied with just the apology. There was something intoxicating about the fear in Danny's eyes, something that made him feel powerful in a way he had never experienced before. You'll move after you give me your lunch money, Marcus said. Consider it rent for sitting at my table. Danny's face crumpled, and Marcus could see tears starting to form in the kid's eyes. For a moment, Marcus felt a stab of guilt. This was exactly what Derek had done to him. This was the same humiliation, the same powerless feeling that had made his freshman year a nightmare. But the guilt was quickly overwhelmed by the rush of power. Danny handed over the $5 his mother had given him for lunch, and Marcus walked away feeling like he had won something important. That was the beginning of Marcus's reign of terror at Lincoln High. Over the next 2 years, he perfected his system of intimidation and control. He learned exactly how far he could push before teachers got involved. He learned which kids would fight back and which ones would submit. He learned how to make people afraid without leaving marks that would get him in trouble. By his senior year, Marcus was the undisputed king of the school. He had his own crew of followers, kids who were either too scared to oppose him or who wanted to share in his power. He controlled several lunch tables in the cafeteria, had first pick of the best seats in every classroom, and could cut to the front of any line without anyone saying a word. But power, Marcus was beginning to learn, was a hungry beast that always demanded more. It wasn't enough to just intimidate the weak kids anymore. He needed bigger challenges, more dramatic displays of his dominance. He started picking fights with kids who weren't obviously weaker than him. He began targeting students who had friends who might fight back, who posed some kind of threat to his authority. The violence escalated gradually. What started as pushing and shoving turned into real fights. Marcus discovered he was good at fighting, really good. Years of weight training had given him strength, but more importantly, years of anger had given him a ruthless edge that most of his opponents lacked. He fought like someone who had nothing to lose, because in many ways, he felt like he didn't. Teachers started to notice, but Marcus was careful. He never fought on school property where cameras might catch him. He never left marks that couldn't be explained away as accidents from sports or roughhousing. And most importantly, his victims were too scared to report him. Who was going to believe some scared freshman over Marcus Thompson, who got good grades and whose father worked at the mill with half their fathers? The truth was, Marcus was miserable. The power he had worked so hard to build felt hollow and empty. He had no real friends, just followers who were afraid of him. He had no girlfriend, because most girls were either scared of him or disgusted by his reputation. He had no peace, because maintaining his position required constant vigilance and violence. But he couldn't stop. The fear of going back to being that scared, lonely freshman was worse than the emptiness of his current life. At least now people knew his name. At least now he mattered, even if it was for all the wrong reasons. Marcus told himself that this was just how the world worked. The strong survived, and the weak got crushed. He had learned this lesson the hard way during his freshman year, and he wasn't about to forget it. If that made him a bully, then so be it. Better to be feared than pitied. But deep down, in a part of himself that he tried to keep buried, Marcus knew he had become the very thing that had once terrorized him. He had turned into Derek Williams, only worse. Derek had been cruel, but Marcus was systematic about it. Derek had been a bully, but Marcus was a tyrant. The worst part was that he couldn't see any way out. His reputation was set in stone. His identity was built around being the toughest, scariest guy in school. If he showed weakness now, if he tried to change, he would lose everything. And losing everything meant going back to being nothing, which was a fate worse than death in Marcus's mind. So he doubled down on his aggression. He became meaner, more unpredictable, more willing to use violence to solve problems. He surrounded himself with kids who fed off his power and encouraged his worst impulses. He built walls around his heart and convinced himself that he didn't need anyone or anything except fear and respect. That was his mindset on the morning when he walked into the cafeteria and saw Jamie Chun sitting at what he considered his table. Jamie was small, quiet, and exactly the kind of target that Marcus couldn't resist. What Marcus didn't know was that this time, someone would be watching. Someone who wouldn't be intimidated by his reputation or his size. Someone who was about to change everything. Miguel Rodriguez had seen enough violence to last several lifetimes. At 42 years old, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had nothing left to prove to anyone. His weathered hands bore the scars of 2 tours in Afghanistan, and his dark eyes held the kind of depth that came from seeing both the worst and best of humanity. The job at Lincoln High School wasn't what Miguel had planned when he left the Army 3 years earlier. He had hoped to find work in private security or maybe join the police force, but the transition from military life to civilian employment had been harder than he expected. The skills that made him an excellent soldier didn't always translate to the corporate world, and potential employers seemed nervous about hiring someone with his background. When the position of head security guard at Lincoln High opened up, Miguel almost didn't apply. Working with teenagers seemed like a step backward from his military career. But his wife, Carmen, had convinced him to give it a chance. They needed the steady paycheck and the health insurance, especially with their own daughter starting high school in the fall. Miguel's first day at Lincoln High was eye-opening in ways he hadn't expected. He arrived early, wanted to get a feel for the school before the students showed up. Principal Williams gave him a brief orientation, explaining the basic rules and procedures, but Miguel could tell the man was holding something back. The main thing, Principal Williams said as they walked through the empty hallways, is to maintain order without escalating situations. These kids can be challenging, but most of them are good at heart. Sometimes they just need someone to remind them of the boundaries. Miguel nodded, but he could hear something in the principal's voice that suggested the job might be more complicated than it appeared. There was a weariness there, a suggestion that maintaining order at Lincoln High was easier said than done. His first week confirmed his suspicions. Lincoln High wasn't the worst school he could have ended up at, but it had its problems. There were the usual issues you'd expect at any urban high school. Kids cutting class, minor drug possession, the occasional fight between rivals. But there was something else, something that took Miguel a few days to identify. Fear. There was an undercurrent of fear running through the school that went beyond the normal social anxieties of teenage life. Miguel noticed it in the way certain students moved through the hallways, always looking over their shoulders. He saw in the way some kids would suddenly change direction when they spotted certain other students. Most telling of all, he saw it in the way teachers and staff would sometimes look the other way when obvious problems were happening right in front of them. It didn't take long for Miguel to figure out where that fear was coming from. Marcus Thompson's reputation preceded him wherever he went. Students would whisper his name in hushed tones, and Miguel began to notice how the energy in any room would change when Marcus walked in. Conversations would stop, people would tense up, and an invisible circle of space would form around the tall, muscular teenager. Miguel's military training had taught him to observe and assess before taking action. So for his first 2 weeks, he watched Marcus carefully, noting his patterns and behaviors. What he saw troubled him deeply. Marcus operated like a warlord in a failed state. He had claimed territory throughout the school. Certain tables in the cafeteria, specific spots in the hallways, preferred seats in classrooms. Other students had learned to avoid these areas or risk confrontation. He had a crew of followers who acted as enforcers, making sure his rules were followed even when he wasn't around. But it was the systematic nature of the bullying that really bothered Miguel. This wasn't random teenage cruelty. Marcus had created a sophisticated system of intimidation that allowed him to extract what he wanted from weaker students while maintaining plausible deniability to the adults in charge. Miguel watched Marcus demand lunch money from a freshman named Kevin, but it was done so smoothly that anyone not paying close attention would have missed it. Marcus simply walked up to Kevin's table, sat down uninvited, and started a friendly conversation about Kevin's sandwich. Within minutes, Kevin had offered to buy Marcus a drink from the vending machine. To a casual observer, it looked like 2 friends sharing lunch. But Miguel could see the fear in Kevin's eyes, and the predatory satisfaction in Marcus's smile. The next day, Miguel witnessed Marcus accidentally bump into a sophomore named Lisa as she carried a stack of art projects down the hallway. The collision sent her carefully crafted sculptures crashing to the floor, where they shattered into pieces. Marcus offered a theatrical apology, expressing dismay at the accident while his friends snickered behind him. Lisa fought back tears as she knelt to gather the broken pieces of weeks of work. These weren't isolated incidents. Miguel began to realize that Marcus had perfected the art of plausible cruelty. Every act of bullying could be explained away as an accident, a misunderstanding, or just kids being kids. It was brilliant in its subtlety and devastating in its effectiveness. What made it worse was the way the rest of the school had adapted to Marcus's reign of terror. Students had learned to navigate around him like pedestrians avoiding a dangerous intersection. Teachers had learned to look the other way rather than deal with the complications of confronting him. Even the administration seemed to have reached an unofficial understanding that it was easier to let Marcus have his way than to fight a battle they weren't sure they could win. Miguel had seen similar dynamics in Afghanistan, where local strongmen would control territory through fear and violence while maintaining the pretense of legitimacy. The parallel was disturbing. A 17-year-old boy had essentially turned his high school into a dictatorship, and everyone had just accepted it as the way things were. The breaking point came during Miguel's third week on the job. He was making his rounds through the school when he heard raised voices coming from one of the side hallways near the gym. When he turned the corner, he found Marcus towering over a small freshman named David who was pressed against the lockers with tears streaming down his face. "I don't have any more money," David was saying, his voice shaking with fear. "I already gave you everything my mom gave me for lunch." Marcus's response was delivered in a tone that was both casual and menacing. "That's not my problem, little man. You borrowed $5 from me last week, and now it's time to pay interest. $10, or we're going to have a problem." Miguel stepped into view, his military bearing making him seem larger than his actual height of 5 feet 10 inches. "Is there a problem here, gentlemen?" Marcus turned to face him, and for the first time, Miguel saw the teenager's intimidation tactics directed at him personally. Marcus straightened to his full height, using his 6-foot frame to loom over the security guard. His crew, who had been hanging back during the confrontation with David, moved closer to flank their leader. "No problem, sir," Marcus said, his voice dripping with fake respect. "David here just bumped into me by accident. We were just talking about being more careful in the hallways." David looked at Miguel with desperate eyes, clearly wanting to tell the truth, but too terrified of the consequences. Miguel understood the kid's dilemma. If he contradicted Marcus's story, he would face retaliation later when no adults were around to protect him. "Is that right, David?" Miguel asked, giving the boy an opportunity to speak up. David glanced at Marcus, saw the subtle threat in his expression, and nodded miserably. "Yes, sir. It was just an accident." Miguel knew he was being lied to, but he also knew that forcing the truth out of David would only make things worse for the kid later. Instead, he filed the incident away in his memory and made a mental note to keep a closer eye on Marcus Thompson. But Marcus wasn't done testing the new security guard. As David hurried away, Marcus turned his attention fully to Miguel. "You know, Mr. Rodriguez, this is a pretty big school. Lots of hallways, lots of students. It would be impossible for one person to see everything that goes on here." The words were spoken politely, but the message was clear. You can't watch everyone all the time, and when you're not watching, I'll still be here. Miguel met Marcus's stare without flinching. His years of military service had taught him how to deal with bullies, whether they wore enemy uniforms or high school letterman jackets. "You're right," he said calmly. "It is a big school, but I'm a patient man, and I'm very good at my job." Something flickered in Marcus's eyes, surprise, maybe, or irritation that his intimidation tactics weren't working. He wasn't used to adults who didn't back down from his implied threats. "I'm sure you are, sir," Marcus said, his tone shifting slightly. "I hope we can work together to keep this place safe for everyone." With that, Marcus and his crew walked away, but Miguel could see the tension in the teenager's shoulders. The encounter had been a test, and Marcus wasn't entirely satisfied with the results. That evening, Miguel went home and told Carmen about his day. She listened carefully as he described the dynamic at the school and his growing concerns about Marcus Thompson. "Sounds like this kid has some serious issues," Carmen said, "but also sounds like he's crying out for help, even if he doesn't know it." Miguel had been thinking the same thing. Underneath Marcus's carefully constructed facade of toughness, he could see glimpses of something else. There was pain there, and anger, and a desperate need to be seen as strong. Miguel recognized those feelings because he had experienced them himself during his own difficult teenage years. Before joining the army, Miguel had grown up in a rough neighborhood where strength was the only currency that mattered. He had made his own share of mistakes, had his own encounters with violence and aggression. The military had given him structure and purpose, channeling his anger into something constructive. But he remembered what it felt like to be angry at the world and unsure how to express that anger in healthy ways. The difference was that Miguel had been lucky enough to have people in his life who cared enough to guide him toward better choices. For what he could observe, Marcus didn't have those kinds of positive influences. His father worked long hours and seemed disconnected from his son's school life. His mother appeared overwhelmed and exhausted. The teachers and administrators had essentially given up on trying to reach him. Miguel began to formulate a plan. He couldn't just confront Marcus directly. That would likely escalate the situation and make things worse for the students Marcus was targeting. But he also couldn't stand by and watch while a teenager terrorized his peers and turn the school into his personal kingdom. Instead, Miguel decided to employ a strategy that had served him well in the military: careful observation, strategic positioning, and patience. He would make himself more visible in the areas where Marcus operated. He would build relationships with the students who were being targeted, letting them know they had an ally if they needed one. And most importantly, he would wait for Marcus to make a mistake. The opportunity came sooner than he expected. Miguel had been on the job for exactly 3 weeks when he walked into the cafeteria during lunch period and saw Marcus advancing on a small Asian boy who was sitting alone at a corner table. The boy, Jamie Chun, according to his student records, was clearly terrified but trying to stand his ground. Miguel positioned himself where he could see and hear everything but remained far enough away that his presence wouldn't immediately escalate the situation. He wanted to understand exactly what was happening before he intervened. What he witnessed was Marcus Thompson at his absolute worst. The systematic humiliation, the casual cruelty, the way Marcus seemed to feed off Jamie's fear, it was everything Miguel had observed and suspected played out in real time for everyone in the cafeteria to see. But this time was different. This time, there was a witness who wouldn't look the other way. This time, Marcus had finally pushed too far in front of someone who had both the authority and the courage to stop him. Miguel had seen enough. As Marcus raised his hand to strike the helpless boy, Miguel stepped forward, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "That's enough." The words cut through the tension in the cafeteria like a blade. Conversation stopped, and every head turned to look at the security guard who had dared to challenge Marcus Thompson. But Miguel wasn't looking at the crowd. His entire focus was on Marcus, who had frozen with his hand still raised in the air. For a moment, the entire cafeteria held its breath. Everyone knew something significant was about to happen. The question was what Marcus would do next. Would he back down from this unexpected challenge to his authority, or would he double down and assert his dominance in front of everyone? Miguel could see the calculation happening behind Marcus's eyes. The teenager was weighing his options, trying to decide whether this new security guard was someone he could intimidate or someone he needed to respect. It was a critical moment, and both men seemed to understand that what happened next would set the tone for all their future interactions. Marcus made his choice. Instead of lowering his hand, instead of stepping away from Jamie, he turned his full attention to Miguel with a look of pure defiance. The message was clear: this is my school, these are my rules, and you don't have the authority to stop me. Mind your own business, old man. Marcus said loud enough for half the cafeteria to hear. "This doesn't concern you." Miguel took a step closer, his military training evident in every movement. He had dealt with insurgents and enemy combatants who were far more dangerous than an angry teenager, but he also understood that this moment was about more than just stopping one act of bullying. This was about the culture of the entire school, about whether fear or justice would prevail. "Actually," Miguel said calmly, "everything that happens in this school is my business. And what I'm seeing right now stops here." Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Or what? You're going to stop me?" The challenge hung in the air between them. Miguel could see that Marcus was past the point of backing down peacefully. The teenager had built his entire identity around being untouchable, and he couldn't afford to lose face in front of the entire school. Even if he wanted to walk away, which Miguel doubted, his reputation wouldn't allow it. Miguel understood the position Marcus was in, but he also understood his own responsibilities. He had sworn to protect the students in his care, and that included protecting them from each other when necessary. Jamie Chun deserved to eat his lunch in peace. Every student in that cafeteria deserved to feel safe in their own school. "I'm going to ask you one more time to step away from that student," Miguel said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "After that, I'm going to make you step away." Marcus's response was swift and decisive. Instead of words, he chose violence. His fist shot out toward Miguel's face with all the power and fury of 3 years of accumulated rage and frustration. But Miguel Rodriguez wasn't just a security guard. He was a decorated Army veteran who had survived multiple combat deployments and countless life-or-death situations. He had reflexes honed by years of military training and instincts sharpened by real warfare. Catching a punch thrown by an angry teenager, no matter how big and strong that teenager was child's play compared to the challenges he had faced in Afghanistan. What happened next took less than 3 seconds, but would be remembered and talked about for years to come. It would be the beginning of the end of Marcus Thompson's reign of terror, and the beginning of a journey that would change both their lives forever. Time seemed to slow as Marcus Thompson's fist cut through the air toward Miguel Rodriguez's face. The entire cafeteria watched in stunned silence as the unstoppable force that had terrorized Lincoln High School for 3 years finally met an immovable object. But what happened next defied everyone's expectations. Miguel didn't dodge the punch. He didn't block it or try to step aside. Instead, with movements so fluid they seemed almost choreographed, he caught Marcus's fist in his open palm like he was catching a baseball. The sound of flesh meeting flesh echoed through the silent cafeteria with a sharp smack that made several students flinch. For a split second, Marcus stared at his captured fist in complete disbelief. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. In his world, when Marcus Thompson threw a punch, people went down. They didn't catch his fist like it was moving in slow motion. They certainly didn't make it look effortless. Before Marcus could process what was happening, Miguel stepped forward and to the side in one smooth motion, using Marcus's own momentum against him. It was a technique he had learned in Army close-quarters combat training, designed to neutralize an attacker without causing serious injury. He twisted Marcus's arm behind his back and applied just enough pressure to immobilize him completely. The entire sequence took less than 3 seconds from start to finish. One moment Marcus was throwing what he thought would be a devastating punch, and the next moment he was face down on the cafeteria floor with his arm twisted behind him and Miguel's knee pressed firmly into his back. The silence that followed was deafening. 300 students sat frozen in their seats, their lunch trays forgotten as they tried to process what they had just witnessed. Marcus Thompson, the Marcus Thompson who had ruled their school through fear and violence, was pinned to the ground like a child being disciplined by his father. Miguel's voice, when he finally spoke, was calm and controlled, showing no sign of exertion despite having just subdued a much larger opponent. "The punch is over, Marcus. Now we're going to have a conversation about respect and consequences." Marcus struggled against Miguel's hold, his face red with a mixture of pain and humiliation. "Get off me," he shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. "You can't do this." I'll have you fired. My father will, your father, Miguel interrupted calmly, is going to be very interested in hearing about what happened here today. But right now, you're going to listen to what I have to say. The pressure on Marcus's arm increased slightly, not enough to cause injury, but enough to make it clear that resistance was futile. For 3 years, you've been terrorizing students in this school. You've been taking their money, destroying their property, and making them afraid to come to school. That ends today. Marcus tried to push himself up, but Miguel's positioning was perfect. Years of military training had taught him how to control a larger opponent using leverage and technique rather than brute strength. Marcus was bigger and probably stronger, but he was also untrained and operating on pure emotion while Miguel remained calm and calculated. You think you're tough, don't you, Marcus? Miguel continued, his voice carrying a note of sadness along with the authority. You think being able to intimidate kids smaller than you makes you a man. But let me tell you something about real toughness. Real toughness is protecting people who can't protect themselves. Real toughness is standing up to bullies, not being one. The words hit Marcus harder than any physical blow could have. He had built his entire identity around being tough, around being feared and respected. But lying on the cafeteria floor with his face pressed against the cold linoleum, he felt anything but tough. He felt small and weak and humiliated in front of everyone who had once feared him. Miguel could see the fight going out of Marcus, could feel the tension leaving the teenager's body as the reality of his situation sank in. I'm going to let you up now, he said quietly. But if you make any aggressive moves, if you try to continue this fight in any way, you're going to find yourself right back on this floor. Do we understand each other? Marcus nodded reluctantly, his earlier bravado completely deflated. Miguel slowly released the pressure on his arm and stepped back, giving the teenager room to get to his feet, but remaining close enough to react if necessary. As Marcus stood up, brushing dust and food crumbs off his clothes, the full scope of his humiliation became clear. His carefully cultivated image as the toughest guy in school had been shattered in front of everyone. Students who had cowered in his presence just minutes before were now looking at him with expressions ranging from curiosity to pity to poorly concealed satisfaction. But it was the look in Jamie Chen's eyes that really drove the point home. The small boy was no longer terrified. Instead, he was looking at Marcus with something that might have been disappointment or even sadness. It was as if Jamie could see through Marcus's tough exterior to the scared, angry kid underneath. Miguel turned his attention to the crowd of students who had witnessed the encounter. The show's over, everyone. Please finish your lunch and go about your day. Slowly, conversations resumed, and the normal sounds of the cafeteria returned, but Marcus could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes on him. Some students were whispering to their friends, no doubt sharing their thoughts about what they had just seen. Others were staring openly, trying to reconcile the Marcus who had just been taken down by a security guard with a Marcus who had terrorized them for years. Marcus, Miguel said, his voice now gentle but still firm. You, and I need to have a private conversation. Principal Williams's office. Now, the walk from the cafeteria to the principal's office felt like the longest journey of Marcus's life. Every step was a reminder of his humiliation. Every glance from passing students a confirmation that his reputation was in ruins. The hallways that had once parted before him like the Red Sea now felt hostile and unwelcoming. Principal Williams was waiting for them when they arrived at his office. Word had traveled fast, and Miguel had radioed ahead to explain what had happened. The principal's expression was a mixture of relief and concern as he gestured for Marcus to take a seat. I have to say, Mr. Thompson, I'm disappointed, but not surprised, Principal Williams began. Your behavior has been escalating for months, and we've received numerous complaints from students and their parents. Marcus sat slumped in his chair, his earlier arrogance completely gone. The adrenaline from the confrontation was wearing off, replaced by a crushing sense of defeat and confusion. Everything he thought he knew about himself and His place in the world had been turned upside down in the span of a few minutes. Miguel took a seat across from Marcus, his demeanor now more counselor than security guard. Marcus, I want you to understand something. What happened in that cafeteria wasn't about me showing how tough I am. It was about stopping a pattern of behavior that was hurting other people. You humiliated me in front of the entire school, Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. No, Miguel replied firmly. You humiliated yourself. I just stopped you from hurting someone else. There's a difference. Principal Williams leaned forward in his chair. Marcus, we've talked about this before. Your grades are good enough for college. You have potential, but your behavior is going to derail everything if you don't get it under control. But Marcus wasn't really listening to the principal. His attention was focused on Miguel, trying to understand how a man who was smaller and older than him had made his defeat look so effortless. It wasn't just the physical technique, though that had been impressive enough. It was the calm confidence, the complete lack of fear, the way Miguel had controlled the entire situation from start to finish. How did you do that? Marcus asked suddenly, interrupting Principal Williams mid-sentence. Miguel understood what he was asking. Military training, close-quarters combat, but more importantly, discipline and self-control. I didn't fight you because I was angry or because I wanted to hurt you. I stopped you because it was necessary. You made it look easy. It was easy, Miguel said bluntly. You're big and strong, Marcus, but you're untrained and you let your emotions control your actions. That makes you predictable. Real fighters, real warriors, they learn to control themselves first before they can control anything else. Something in Miguel's words seemed to resonate with Marcus. For the first time since entering the office, he sat up straighter and looked directly at the security guard. Could you teach me? The words came out before Marcus could stop himself. Principal Williams looked surprised, but Miguel nodded thoughtfully. Teach you what exactly? To fight like that. To be in control like that. Miguel was quiet for a long moment, studying Marcus's face. He could see something there that hadn't been present during their earlier confrontation. Genuine curiosity, maybe even a hint of respect. It was the first crack in Marcus's armor that Miguel had observed. Fighting isn't about hurting people, Marcus. Real martial arts, real combat training, is about discipline, respect, and self-improvement. It's about becoming a better version of yourself, not just learning new ways to intimidate others. I understand, Marcus said, though Miguel suspected he didn't really understand at all. Not yet. Principal Williams cleared his throat. Before we talk about any kind of training, we need to address the immediate consequences of what happened today. Marcus, you threw a punch at a school employee. That's assault, and it could result in criminal charges. The words hit Marcus like a bucket of cold water. In all his calculations about the confrontation, he hadn't considered the legal implications of attacking a school employee. Suddenly, the humiliation of being taken down seemed like the least of his problems. Miguel held up a hand. I don't want to press charges. What happened today was a learning experience for everyone involved. But there do need to be consequences. Over the next hour, they worked out a plan. Marcus would be suspended for 3 days and would have to write a formal apology to Jamie Chun and the other students he had bullied over the years. He would also be required to attend anger management counseling and would lose his privileges to eat lunch in the main cafeteria for the remainder of the school year. But the most significant consequence was also the most unexpected. Miguel offered to work with Marcus after school, teaching him basic self-defense and martial arts principles, but with strict conditions. Marcus would have to demonstrate real change in his behavior toward other students. Any reports of bullying or intimidation would result in immediate termination of the training. And most importantly, Marcus would have to use what he learned to protect others, not to hurt them. As they left Principal Williams's office, Marcus felt like he was walking into a completely different world than the one he had known that morning. His reputation was destroyed, his friends would probably abandon him, and his carefully constructed identity as the toughest guy in school was in ruins. But there was something else there too, something he couldn't quite identify. For the first time in years, someone had offered to teach him something meaningful. For the first time since his freshman year, someone had looked at him and seen potential for something other than fear and intimidation. The news of Marcus's defeat spread through Lincoln High School like wildfire. By the end of the day, there wasn't a student in the building who hadn't heard some version of what happened in the cafeteria. The details grew more elaborate with each telling, but the core facts remained the same. Marcus Thompson had thrown a punch at the new security guard and ended up flat on his back in less than 3 seconds. The immediate effects were dramatic. Students who had spent years living in fear of Marcus suddenly felt free to walk the hallways without looking over their shoulders. The tables in the cafeteria that had been Marcus's exclusive territory were suddenly available to everyone. Kids who had been giving up their lunch money or doing Marcus's homework stopped showing up to their usual meeting spots. But perhaps the most significant change was in Marcus himself. The swagger was gone, replaced by a subdued uncertainty that no one had ever seen from him before. He walked through the hallways with his head down, avoiding eye contact with the students who had once feared him. Some students were enjoying his downfall, whispering comments and pointing as he passed. Others seemed almost sad to see how far he had fallen. A few, particularly those who had been his primary targets, watched him with wary confusion, unsure whether this change was genuine or just another manipulation. Jamie Chun, the boy who had been the catalyst for the confrontation, sought out Marcus before the end of the school day. He found the former bully sitting alone in a stairwell, staring at the floor with his shoulders slumped in defeat. "Hey," Jamie said quietly, sitting down next to Marcus on the steps. Marcus looked up, expecting to see triumph or mockery in the smaller boy's eyes. Instead, he saw something that surprised him: understanding. "I know what it's like to feel powerless," Jamie said. "I know what it's like to feel like you have to fight just to survive. But what you did to me and others, that wasn't about survival. That was about making other people feel the way you felt." Marcus wanted to defend himself, to explain about his freshman year and Derek Williams and all the reasons he had become what he was. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, he just nodded, acknowledging the truth of what Jamie was saying. "Mr. Rodriguez seems like a good man," Jamie continued. "If he's willing to help you, maybe you should let him." As Jamie walked away, Marcus remained sitting on the stairs, thinking about everything that had changed in the span of a single lunch period. He had lost everything he thought mattered: his reputation, his power, his identity as someone to be feared. But maybe, just maybe, he had gained an opportunity to become something better. The punch that was supposed to establish his dominance had instead marked the beginning of his redemption. The teeth that had been knocked loose weren't just physical. They were symbolic of the foundation of his old life crumbling away to make room for something new. The 3 days of suspension gave Marcus Thompson time to think, and thinking was the last thing he wanted to do. For 3 years, he had built his life around action and reaction, intimidation and control. Quiet reflection was foreign territory that made him uncomfortable in ways he couldn't fully understand. His parents' reaction to the incident had been swift and severe. Robert Thompson had come home from his shift at the steel mill to find his son suspended for attacking a school employee. The disappointment in his father's eyes was somehow worse than the anger Marcus had expected. "I thought I raised you better than this," his father said, sitting heavily at the kitchen table after hearing the full story. "Your mother and I work ourselves to the bone to give you opportunities we never had, and this is what you do with them." Sarah Thompson's response was quieter but no less devastating. She didn't yell or lecture. Instead, she simply asked, "What happened to my little boy? When did you become someone I don't recognize?" The question haunted Marcus throughout his suspension. When had he stopped being Sarah Thompson's little boy and become Marcus the bully? The transformation had been so gradual that he couldn't pinpoint exactly when it happened, but the end result was undeniable. He had become someone his own mother was afraid to recognize. On his second day of suspension, Marcus found himself walking through the neighborhood where he had grown up, trying to remember who he used to be before Lincoln High School changed him. He passed the park where he used to play as a child, the corner store where his mother would buy him candy when money was tight, the bus stop where he had waited nervously on his first day of high school. Everything looked smaller than he remembered, but also somehow more real. For years, his world had consisted entirely of the hallways and classrooms of Lincoln High, where he was either a predator or prey, feared or fearing. Out here in the real world, none of that mattered. He was just another teenager walking down the street, notable only for his size and the troubled expression on his face. At the park, Marcus sat on the same swings he had played on as a child. The metal chains creaked under his weight, and his knees almost touched the ground, but something about the familiar motion was comforting. He remembered being 8 years old, pumping his legs as hard as he could, trying to swing high enough to touch the clouds. Back then, his biggest worry had been whether his mother would let him stay up late to watch cartoons. He had friends in the neighborhood, kids who liked him for his sense of humor and his willingness to share his toys. He had been happy in a simple, uncomplicated way that seemed impossible now. What had changed? When had happiness become something to be taken from others rather than something to be found within himself? The answer, when it came to him, was brutally simple. He had let Derek Williams's cruelty define him. Instead of refusing to become like his tormentor, he had embraced that path as the only way to survive. In trying to protect himself from being hurt, he had become someone who hurt others. In trying to never be powerless again, he had made powerlessness his weapon of choice against those weaker than himself. On his third day of suspension, Marcus did something he hadn't done in years. He went to the public library and checked out books about martial arts and military history. If he was going to learn from Miguel Rodriguez, he wanted to understand what real discipline looked like. The books painted a picture of martial arts that was completely different from what Marcus had expected. Instead of focusing on how to hurt people more effectively, they emphasized self-control, respect for others, and the responsibility that came with physical power. Masters of various fighting disciplines spoke about using their skills to protect the innocent, not to dominate the weak. One passage particularly struck him. A famous martial artist had written, "The ultimate aim of martial arts is not having to use them. The greatest victory is the one that requires no battle." Marcus read the words over and over, trying to understand how someone could see not fighting as a victory when fighting had been his primary means of getting what he wanted for so long. When Marcus returned to Lincoln High School after his suspension, he felt like he was entering enemy territory. The looks he received from other students ranged from curious to hostile to sympathetic. His former followers had already begun to distance themselves from him, sensing that his power was broken and not wanting to be associated with his downfall. The hardest part was lunch period. For 3 years, Marcus had held court in the cafeteria, surrounded by kids who laughed at his jokes and competed for his approval. Now he sat alone at a table in the corner, eating a sandwich his mother had packed, and tried to ignore the whispers and stares from around the room. Jamie Chun walked by his table during lunch, and for a moment their eyes met. Marcus wanted to say something, to apologize for years of cruelty, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he just nodded slightly, and Jamie nodded back before continuing on his way. It was a small gesture, but it felt significant. That afternoon, Marcus reported to the gym after school for his first training session with Miguel Rodriguez. The security guard was waiting for him, dressed in simple athletic clothes and standing in the center of the empty basketball court. "Before we begin," Miguel said, "I need you to understand what this is and what it isn't. This isn't about teaching you new ways to hurt people. This isn't about making you a better fighter so you can go back to bullying others. This is about discipline, self-control, and understanding what real strength means." Marcus nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure he understood the distinction. "The first thing you need to learn," Miguel continued, "is that physical strength is worthless without mental discipline. A person who can't control their emotions is a danger to themselves and everyone around them, no matter how strong they are." For the next hour, Miguel didn't teach Marcus any fighting techniques. Instead, he focused on basic physical conditioning and breathing exercises designed to promote calmness and focus. They did push-ups and sit-ups, ran laps around the gym, and practiced meditation techniques that Miguel had learned during his military service. "This is boring," Marcus complained after 20 minutes of sitting quietly and focusing on his breathing. Boring is good, Miguel replied. Boring means you're learning to be comfortable with stillness instead of always needing excitement or conflict. Boring means you're developing patience. As the weeks went by, Marcus slowly began to understand what Miguel was trying to teach him. The physical training was rigorous, but not focused on aggression. Instead, it emphasized balance, control, and precision. Miguel taught him basic defensive moves, but always in the context of protecting himself or others, never as tools of intimidation. More importantly, Miguel spent time talking with Marcus about the psychology of violence and the difference between strength and brutality. He shared stories from his military service, explaining how the most effective soldiers were often those who were most reluctant to use violence, because they understood its true cost. In Afghanistan, Miguel told him one afternoon as they practiced basic defensive stances, I met soldiers who were incredibly skilled fighters, but who went out of their way to avoid conflicts that could be resolved peacefully. They understood that real strength isn't about proving you can beat someone up. It's about having the wisdom to know when not to fight. Marcus found these concepts difficult to grasp at first. His understanding of strength had been built entirely around the ability to intimidate and control others. The idea that restraint could be more powerful than aggression was foreign to everything he had learned about surviving in high school. But gradually, he began to see examples of what Miguel meant. During lunch one day, Marcus witnessed a confrontation between two underclassmen that would have previously been an opportunity for him to assert his dominance. Instead, he watched as one of the boys chose to walk away rather than escalate the situation. The boy who walked away wasn't weak, Marcus realized. He was in control of himself and the situation. The real test of Marcus's progress came 6 weeks into his training. He was walking through the hallway after school when he heard familiar sounds coming from around the corner. The sound of someone being pushed around and intimidated. When Marcus looked around the corner, he saw 3 of his former followers surrounding a freshman named Tony Martinez, demanding that he hand over his new sneakers. Marcus's first instinct was to keep walking. These weren't his followers anymore, and Tony Martinez wasn't his responsibility. But something Miguel had said during one of their training sessions echoed in his mind. Real strength is protecting people who can't protect themselves. Without fully deciding to act, Marcus found himself walking around the corner and into the confrontation. Leave him alone, Marcus said quietly. The 3 boys, Kevin, Josh, and Mike, turned to look at him in surprise. They had been part of Marcus's crew for over a year, but they hadn't spoken to him since his humiliating defeat in the cafeteria. This doesn't concern you, Marcus, Kevin said, trying to project the same kind of intimidating confidence that Marcus used to display. You're not our leader anymore. You're right, Marcus agreed. I'm not your leader, but I'm also not going to stand by and watch you terrorize someone who can't fight back. Josh laughed nervously. What are you going to do about it? Fight all 3 of us? We know you're not as tough as you pretended to be. Marcus felt the familiar surge of anger that used to drive his violent responses. His hands clenched into fists, and for a moment he was tempted to show these former followers exactly how tough he still was. But Miguel's training held. Instead of acting on his anger, he took a deep breath and forced himself to remain calm. I don't need to fight you, Marcus said, but I will if you don't leave Tony alone. There was something different in Marcus's voice, something that the 3 boys couldn't quite identify. It wasn't the old arrogance or the need to prove his dominance. It was quieter, but somehow more certain, like the voice of someone who had nothing to prove, but everything to protect. The confrontation might have escalated, but at that moment Miguel Rodriguez appeared at the end of the hallway. He didn't say anything or make any aggressive moves, but his presence was enough to tip the balance. Kevin, Josh, and Mike decided they didn't want to face both Marcus and the security guard who had humiliated their former leader. This isn't over, Kevin muttered as the 3 of them walked away. Yes, it is, Marcus replied, but he said it so quietly that only Tony Martinez could hear. After his former followers left, Marcus helped Tony gather his scattered books and walked with him to the front of the school. "Why did you help me?" Tony asked as they reached the main entrance. Marcus thought about the question for a long moment. "Because someone should have helped me when I was in your position," he finally said. "Because it was the right thing to do." That evening, Miguel found Marcus staying late in the gym, practicing the defensive techniques they had been working on. "I heard about what happened in the hallway today," Miguel said. Marcus stopped practicing and turned to face his mentor. "Did I do the right thing? What do you think?" "I think so, but it felt strange. I kept wanting to fight them, to show them I was still stronger than they were. But then I remembered what you said about real strength being about protecting people." Miguel smiled. "That internal struggle you felt, that's normal. Learning to control your instincts takes time. The important thing is that you chose to do the right thing even when it was difficult. They'll probably try to cause trouble for me now." "Probably," Miguel agreed. "But you have something they don't have. You have purpose beyond just asserting your dominance. You have a reason to be strong that goes beyond yourself." As Marcus walked home that night, he reflected on how much his life had changed since that confrontation in the cafeteria. He had lost his reputation as the toughest guy in school, but he had gained something more valuable, a sense of what he actually wanted to be. The boy who had thrown that punch at Miguel Rodriguez was disappearing, being replaced by someone Marcus was just beginning to understand. The new Marcus wasn't defined by fear or anger or the need to control others. He was defined by the choice to use whatever strength he had to protect those who needed protection. It wasn't an easy transformation. There were days when Marcus missed the simplicity of his old life, when being feared meant never having to think about whether his actions were right or wrong. But those moments of nostalgia were becoming rarer as he discovered what it felt like to actually like the person he was becoming. The road to redemption was longer and more difficult than Marcus had expected, but for the first time in years, he was walking in the right direction. 6 months after the incident in the cafeteria, Lincoln High School had become a different place. The atmosphere of fear that had pervaded the hallways for 3 years was gradually being replaced by something healthier. Students walked with more confidence, knowing they didn't have to worry about being targeted by Marcus Thompson and his crew. But perhaps the most dramatic change was in Marcus himself. The angry, violent teenager who had terrorized his classmates was still there beneath the surface, but he was being steadily replaced by someone entirely different. Marcus had grown not just in wisdom and self-control, but in understanding what it meant to be truly strong. His daily routine now revolved around the training sessions with Miguel Rodriguez. What had started as simple physical conditioning had evolved into a comprehensive program that included martial arts techniques, meditation, conflict resolution, and what Miguel called character development. Marcus learned not just how to defend himself and others, but when to use those skills and, more importantly, when not to. The physical transformation was obvious to everyone who knew him. Marcus was still tall and muscular, but he carried himself differently now. The aggressive posture that used to signal danger to everyone around him had been replaced by a calm confidence that somehow seemed more intimidating than his old swagger had ever been. But the real change was internal. Marcus had developed what Miguel called quiet strength, the ability to remain calm under pressure, to think before acting, and to choose his responses rather than simply reacting from emotion. It was a type of power that was far more sustainable than the fear-based control he had wielded before. The test of his transformation came in ways both small and large. When his former followers continued to cause trouble for students they perceived as weak, Marcus found himself consistently intervening, not with violence or threats, but with a presence that seemed to defuse situations before they could escalate. One afternoon, Marcus was studying in a library when he noticed a group of seniors hassling a junior named Alex who was trying to use one of the computers. The seniors weren't being overtly violent, but they were clearly intimidating Alex in the same subtle way that Marcus used to employ. Marcus closed his book and walked over to where the confrontation was taking place. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice calm, but carrying an unmistakable authority. The seniors looked at him warily. They knew Marcus's reputation, both his old reputation as a bully and his newer reputation as someone who protected others. They also knew that he had been trained by the security guard who had humiliated him in front of the entire school. "No problem," one of them said quickly. "We were just leaving." As they walked away, Alex looked up at Marcus with a mixture of gratitude and curiosity. "Thanks," he said. "But why did you help me? I thought you were supposed to be the bad guy around here." Marcus considered the question seriously. "I used to be," he said finally, "but I learned that being the bad guy doesn't actually make you strong. It just makes you alone." These kinds of interventions became more frequent as word spread that Marcus Thompson had genuinely changed. Students who were being bullied began to seek him out, knowing that he would help them without demanding anything in return. Teachers noticed the difference and began to treat Marcus with a respect that was based on his character rather than fear of his reputation. The real challenge came when Marcus's past caught up with him in an unexpected way. Derek Williams, the bully who had tormented Marcus during his freshman year and who had graduated 2 years earlier, returned to Lincoln High for a visit. Derek had heard about Marcus's transformation and wanted to see for himself what had happened to the kid he had once terrorized. Marcus was leaving school after his training session with Miguel when he found Derek waiting for him by the front entrance. At 20 years old, Derek was still tall and imposing, and he still carried himself with the same arrogant confidence that Marcus remembered from his freshman year. Well, Derek said with a mocking smile. "If it isn't Marcus Thompson, I heard some interesting stories about you. Heard you got taken down by a security guard in front of the whole school. Heard you turned into some kind of Boy Scout." Marcus felt the familiar surge of anger and humiliation that Derek's presence had always triggered. For a moment, he was 14 years old again, scared and powerless in the face of Derek's casual cruelty. But Miguel's training held. Instead of reacting emotionally, Marcus took a deep breath and studied Derek carefully. What he saw surprised him. Derek was older now, but he seemed smaller somehow. His swagger looked forced rather than natural, and there was something desperate in his need to assert dominance over someone he had tormented years earlier. Marcus realized that Derek was probably just as scared and insecure as he had always been. He had just learned to hide it behind aggression and intimidation. "Hello, Derek," Marcus said calmly. "It's been a while." Derek seemed taken aback by Marcus's composed response. He had expected anger or fear, not polite acknowledgement. "That's it," Derek pressed. "That's all you have to say to the guy who made your life hell for an entire year?" Marcus considered his words carefully. "You taught me some valuable lessons," he said finally. "You show me what it looks like when someone uses their strength to hurt others instead of helping them. You show me the kind of person I never wanted to become. And yet you became exactly that person," Derek shot back. "I heard all about your little reign of terror. You turned into me, Marcus. You became everything you hated." "You're right," Marcus agreed, and his honesty seemed to deflate some of Derek's aggressive energy. "I did become like you, and it made me miserable. It made me someone I couldn't respect, someone my own family was disappointed in." Derek was quiet for a moment, clearly not expecting this level of self-reflection from his former victim. "But here's the difference," Marcus continued. "I learned from my mistakes. I got help. I changed. You're 20 years old, and you're still hanging around a high school trying to intimidate teenagers. Which one of us really grew up?" For the first time in their entire relationship, Marcus saw Derek at a loss for words. The older boy opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, apparently unable to come up with a comeback that didn't make Marcus's point for him. "I don't expect you to apologize for what you did to me," Marcus said. "And I'm not going to apologize for what I became because of it. But I will say this, if you ever see someone being bullied the way you bullied me, and you don't do something to stop it, then you're still the same person you were when you were 17. And that's a pretty sad way to live." Derek stared at Marcus for a long moment, then turned and walked away without another word. Marcus watched him go, feeling a mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness for the person Derek had chosen to remain, and relief that he himself had chosen a different path. "Miguel," who had been watching the encounter from inside the school, joined Marcus by the front entrance. "How do you feel?" Miguel asked. "Different," Marcus said after thinking about it. "A year ago, I would have tried to fight him. 6 months ago, I would have been terrified of him. Today, I just felt sorry for him." "That's growth," Miguel said with approval. "Real strength isn't about being unafraid. It's about choosing how to respond to your fear." As Marcus's senior year progressed, his transformation became complete in ways that surprised everyone, including himself. He began tutoring younger students who were struggling academically, using his own experiences with bullying to connect with kids who felt powerless or afraid. He started a peer mediation program that helped resolve conflicts before they turned violent. Most surprisingly, Marcus began speaking to groups of incoming freshmen about his experiences, sharing his story as a cautionary tale about how easy it was to become the thing you once feared most. These presentations were difficult for Marcus, requiring him to be vulnerable about his past mistakes in front of crowds of kids who might judge him. But the impact was undeniable. Freshmen who heard Marcus speak about his journey from victim to bully to protector often sought him out later for advice about dealing with their own challenges. Teachers reported that incidents of bullying dropped significantly among students who had attended his presentations. The most meaningful moment came during one of these presentations when a small freshman named David raised his hand and asked, "If you could go back and change everything, would you?" Marcus thought about the question seriously before answering. "I would change the way I treated other people," he said. "I would change the pain I caused and the fear I created. But I wouldn't change the lessons I learned or the person I became as a result of those lessons. My mistakes taught me things about myself and about life that I might never have learned otherwise." Another student asked, "Are you still angry about what happened to you when you were a freshman?" "Sometimes," Marcus admitted, "but I'm more grateful than angry now. The person who bullied me taught me what I didn't want to be. The person who stopped me from bullying others taught me what I could be. The people I hurt taught me the importance of forgiveness and redemption." As graduation approached, Marcus received an unexpected honor. He was chosen by the faculty to receive the school's first ever Character Development Award, recognizing a student who had demonstrated significant personal growth and positive impact on the school community. At the graduation ceremony, Marcus walked across the stage to receive his diploma and his special award. As he shook hands with Principal Williams, he looked out at the audience and saw his parents beaming with pride, Miguel Rodriguez applauding enthusiastically, and dozens of students he had helped over the past year cheering for him. But the moment that mattered most came after the ceremony, when Jamie Chun approached him outside the auditorium. "Congratulations," Jamie said, extending his hand for a handshake. Marcus took the offered hand, but pulled Jamie into a brief hug instead. "Thank you," he said, "for giving me the chance to become someone better." "You did that yourself," Jamie replied. "I just happened to be there when you figured it out." As Marcus prepared to leave Lincoln High School for college in the fall, he reflected on the journey that had brought him from that terrible moment in the cafeteria to this celebration of his transformation. The punch he had thrown at Miguel Rodriguez had been meant to assert his dominance and maintain his power through fear. Instead, it had led to the destruction of everything he thought mattered and the beginning of everything that actually did matter. Miguel had accepted a position as the head of security for the entire school district, but he made time for a final conversation with Marcus before graduation. "What's next for you?" Miguel asked as they sat in the empty gym where they had spent so many hours training together. "College first," Marcus said. "Then, I'm thinking about following your path. Military service, maybe law enforcement or security work. I want to spend my life protecting people instead of hurting them." Miguel smiled. "You know, when I caught your punch that day in the cafeteria, I saw an angry, scared kid who was lashing out at the world. But underneath all that anger, I could see someone who just wanted to matter, who wanted to be strong for the right reasons. I'm proud of who you've become. I couldn't have done it without you," Marcus said. "You saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself." "I saw potential," Miguel corrected. "But you're the one who did the work to fulfill it. You're the one who chose to change when change was hard." You're the one who chose to help others when it would have been easier to keep hurting them. As Marcus packed up his belongings and prepared to leave Lincoln High School behind, he thought about the kid who had first walked through these doors 4 years earlier. That scared, lonely freshman seemed like a different person entirely, but Marcus understood now that all the different versions of himself, the victim, the bully, the protector, were part of the same journey. The punch that was supposed to silence his critics had instead opened his ears to wisdom. The moment that was supposed to establish his dominance had instead taught him humility. The teeth that were knocked loose had made room for new words, words of encouragement, protection, and hope. Marcus Thompson graduated from Lincoln High School as a completely different person than the one who had entered it. The angry bully was gone, replaced by a young man who understood that real strength came not from the ability to hurt others, but from the willingness to help them. The journey from victim to victor had been neither quick nor easy, but it had been absolutely worth every difficult step along the way. As he walked out of Lincoln High School for the last time, Marcus carried with him not just a diploma, but a deep understanding of what it meant to be truly strong. He had learned that power without purpose was meaningless, that respect earned through fear was hollow, and that the greatest victories were the ones that required no battle at all. The boy who had once ruled through intimidation was gone forever. In his place stood a young man ready to spend his life proving that redemption was possible for anyone willing to do the hard work of change. The flash that took away his teeth had given him something far more valuable, a chance to become the person